African campaigners demand reform of unjust global system. Very interesting. Africans are being crippled by costly loans and unfair interest rates. Campaigners in Nairobi warned at a key summit this week as they demanded a rebalance of global financing. Africa is at a crucial moment of its development, and Desiree Asogbovu of the One Campaign, a global NGO dedicated to fighting poverty and inequality. High food and energy prices are contributing factors as political instability and climate shocks. Despite this, Africa's Bank, which turns 60 this year, expects growth to start picking up from 2024. Lending bodies such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund were created 80 years ago with the post-World War II Bretton Woods Agreement at a time when most countries did not even exist, he told Radio France International. The AFDB, African Development Bank, created in 1963, and its African Development Fund, operational since 1974, are seen as more understanding of the needs of African economies. The One Campaign is calling for that fund to be replenished to the tune of $25 billion. Governments across the continent needs vast resources, says Kenya's President William Ruto at the summit. What say you?
All right. So and that is again the same policy that corporate media and imperialism keeps propagating and feeding Africans and non-Africans, by the way, globally. First of all, growth is not the same thing as development. Okay. So you can have economic growth and underdevelopment at the same time.
True.
African countries can only develop by increasing the margin of profit that they retain from what they produce. And what do they produce right now? Primarily agricultural so-called raw materials. They also produce natural resources such as products. They also produce mineral resources such as metals, gas, petroleum, and so forth. Right?
Yep.
So currently, all of those products are sold at a fraction of their value to the industrialized countries that then use those resources to use in factories to manufacture products that are not manufactured in African countries, such as automobiles. Somebody might say, wait, but South Africa and Nigeria, a few of these countries produce automobiles. No, they're assembled. They don't manufacture from scratch. Ford does not import the elements that go into their vehicles from foreign countries, right? If they do, it's just because of cheap labor, and it will be minor parts, right? The major components are built by the well-paid, unionized workers at all these automobile plants in Detroit, right? And then they sell these products from all these industrialized countries, whether from North America, whether from Europe, whether from Japan, and now, of course, from China, sell it back to Africa at prices that are grossly, exponentially multiplied relative to the raw materials that, in most cases, come from Africa. So that's one thing they need to do. Retain the higher proportion of the profit, number one. Number two, they need to actually manufacture the products that they now import from industrialized countries within Africa. And of course, the continent has a population of 1.3 billion people. The continent, if they traded amongst themselves,
Correct.
the interest rates and the cost of credit so that we can borrow more money to continue exporting raw materials to the industrialized country, right? So that is like somebody going to their bank and saying, please cancel some of my credit card debt, lower the interest rate, and then the bank accepting, and then you continue consuming, and then you build up the debt all over again. So you're in a cycle, you're not developing. Okay, so let me explain the part when I said growth does not equal development. Development implies and involves structural changes. It involves the cocoa. I don't know what they do in terms of cleaning the cocoa, the processing, and then taking the beans,
the drying,
drying, and whatever else you do with it, and then ultimately feeding it in a factory in Ghana or Ivory Coast. Uganda also produces some cocoa, so in Uganda, and then when it comes out in the form of chocolate. It's well packaged, and then you sell that either domestically. I don't know, myself, I'm not a big fan since sugar is not such a good thing, but since it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, you sell it either domestically in Africa, or you export it to Europe, you export it to Asia, export it to North America, and now you're getting real money. If you go to a Whole Foods and you see, or you go to a specialty chocolate store, you see these tiny boxes, well packaged. It's $50 for a tiny box, a larger box, it's $100. You should be getting a good proportion of that amount, not just selling it in big sacks at literally
at ridiculous prices,
ridiculous low prices, and shipping it as raw material. So that is what you get. But here's the misleading thing when they talk about growth. When they say growth is about to resume in 2024, it's meaningless. What has historically happened is that sometimes the demand for cocoa, the demand for tea, the demand for coffee, the demand for these raw materials appreciates. So when it appreciates, it means the price goes up. It means now each one of these dependent African countries are getting more revenue for the same
as a result of that demand.
That they're producing. So then when they add up these stats at the end of the year, there was economic growth. It's nonsense. It's not growth. Because within a year or two, the prices are going to collapse again. So you are constantly dependent on the ups and downs of the market. In order to have growth, real growth and development, you need to industrialize. So that is the only solution for Africa. That's not the discussion they're having in Nairobi. They're having a begging discussion. Please, please, please lower the cost of credit for us so we can continue running our dependent structural economy and exporting raw materials to the rest of the world. It's a useless conversation.
And I also like to add, there was the talk of Bretton Woods there. For those who are not unfamiliar, the Bretton Woods Agreement was essentially the meeting between Winston Churchill and Mr. Roosevelt, then U.S. President. What was the talk about? It was about how to move away from the constant need to revert to war. So in order to do so, certain organizations came into being. The League of Nations at the time morphed into the United Nations. That was in 1945. The World Bank came into being 1946. The IMF 1947. The General Agreements on Trade and Tariffs, which will eventually become the World Trade Organization, came into being in 1948. In order to lock all of this into play, you had a governing body, which was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So when Brother Milton said earlier that they sat there while they were bombing the deserts and what have you, that is effectively saying this is who we have to control the entire system. If you get out of line, this is who will spank you back into position. So again,
and that's an important part because this is not sadly not taught enough in schools, even in the West, in the industrialized countries, and of course not in our African countries. It is a global system that exists, which existed for at least 5 centuries.
Correct.
the global system. It is altered here and there, but it's the same global system that started with enslaving Africans. That is the best way to extract the total value. All the profits that each African would have generated for himself or herself, producing on their own farm or what have you in an African country, is removed and transferred to the European, who now, quote unquote, owns this individual. When that system ended, because it was slowing down the growth of capitalism, because now you need people to work in factories. And you can't have them in factories if you have them on the plantation at the same time. So they ended the old style slavery and introduced a new form of slavery, which was, of course, of colonialism. They work on your European plantation, the land you took away from their ancestors, but then they go back to their small so-called huts and come back in the morning to continue working for you. You're exploiting them. You left. You gave them so-called independence. You continue exploiting them. And now you have the organization that we just mentioned.
Yeah.
The World Bank, the IMF, the WTO.
WTO.
They regulate the cost of capital. And one of the conditions they give you to borrow money is that thou shalt not industrialize.
Imagine.
Yep. Because how can they allow you to compete with them? You see how they go head to head with China, right?
Yep.
Because China has emerged as a global power, exporting manufactured products all over the world, cutting into markets that used to be the exclusive domain of Europeans.
Of the imperial power.
So you think they're going to help create another China in Africa? You must be out of your mind.
Which was the argument of Brother Walter Rodney in his book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa.